Hey, welcome back to another exciting chapter summary in the great transition book of Acts. And if you have the attention span of a squirrel, this is not the place for you. But I'm going to do my best to bring some interesting things from the Bible to this video. And my goal is to inspire you, encourage you, admonish you to read the Bible for yourself, to know why you believe things that you say you believe. It's not simply enough to say, my pastor says, or I read in some book about the Bible this thing, and so I believe it. It's not good enough. God went out of his way, put thousands of men in harm's way to preserve his words so that we could hold it in our hands, and we are obligated to read it. So let's jump in. Today is Acts chapter 23, and I've got a number of things that I want to highlight from this chapter. What I want to say ahead of time is that when you ignore or minimize the Apostle Paul, whether that's you individually or whether that's your church doing it to you, you are going to spiritually starve. Okay, and I'll explain why I say this in a moment as we get going here. So let's just start reading. Acts 23 and Paul. Okay, so let me back up. If you recall from yesterday, the very end of the chapter, the Jews were trying to kill Paul because he said things they don't like, because sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, words hurt them. And so being the crybaby Jews that they were, they wanted to kill Paul, but they weren't, anyway, they couldn't seem to do it themselves. So they wanted the Romans to do it for them, and on and on and on. So Paul is being prepared to basically plead his case in front of the Romans, but with his accusers being there with him. So it's kind of like a trial of sorts. All right, so Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, "Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day." Okay? It's an interesting statement. Paul was a murderer. Paul was an accomplice to murders, multiple murders. We don't even know how many, probably quite a few. And so how does he say he has lived in all good conscience before God? Well, that's a good question. The quick answer is he killed people that he believed were blaspheming his God, and so he was being a good Jew. Once Jesus Christ got a hold of him, he realized that he was doing it wrong, and God gave him a more excellent way. And so he went from being Saul of Tarsus, a Jewish Pharisee, to being the Apostle Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, the minister of the dispensation of the grace of God. All right, verse 2. And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. So here's Paul, and he says, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And pow, slapped across the face. Then Paul said unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. For sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? Paul hadn't been accused of anything, and he was being punished, and that was against Roman law. And they that stood by, well, in fact, it was against Jewish law. Okay, so verse 4, and they that stood by said, revilest thou God's high priest? Oh, these Jewish, this religious leadership's getting their panties in a wad. Who are you to call me out on? I'm the high priest, right? We see this in churches today. I talk to people every day who made attempts to ask questions in their church and were shut down by the religious leadership. I have experienced that myself. I was accused of not trusting the church. Okay, think about that for a second. Those were the exact words that were spoken to me by the pastoral leadership in the last church that I attended 15 years ago. Now, look, let's make it real clear. I'm not butthurt by the church. Okay, I'm not licking my wounds. No, the church hurt me. No, it's nothing like that. I just moved to a point in my life where I realized how ridiculous churches are. There's some exceptions throughout the world, but most churches are absolutely ridiculous. Trying to follow Jewish law. They're like Catholic light pastors that are trying to be priests, pew warmers that have never read the Bible, that don't know the first thing about how to back up what they believe, and the whole thing is a sham. Okay, so be careful with that. But I just want to assure you, I'm not, I didn't get my feelings hurt and run away from the church. It's nothing like that. I just grew away from the church, the local church. But I am absolutely a member of the church that matters, the body of Christ. And because of that, I read and study my Bible. I feed myself. I don't need anybody spoon feeding me. All right. And so here's Paul getting smacked in the mouth for talking in ways that the religious leadership didn't like. Then said Paul, this is verse 5, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. Okay, so Paul would have rather have not spoken evil of the ruler, but the fact is, the ruler deserved it. So there's always a balance in these things. We should honor leadership, right? Paul talks about this, but not at every turn. There's exceptions, okay? We live in a country now where our leadership is ridiculous. They're committing treason every day. They're not even trying to hide it from us. We're being invaded. Military age men are tromping across the border uninhibited. We're being invaded. But anyway, let's get back to the Bible, because that's just about all I care about. Verse 6, but when Paul perceived that the one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council. Okay, why does this matter? These two denominations that showed up to witness against Paul. Yeah, denominations. If you're in a denomination, shame on you. Get out. Denomination is not even a Bible word. It's not the way God designed things. And it's not this Pharisee and Sadducee thing is not the way God designed things. It's the way man perverted things. And so Paul takes advantage of this. He cries out in the council, men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, of the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am called in question. Why did he say this? Do you know? The reason he said this is because Paul, number one, as Saul of Tarsus, was a Pharisee. So he's like an ex-Pharisee, and he was high ranking. And he knows that the Sadducees do not believe in the resurrection of the dead. And so this was very cunning and wise behavior on Paul's part, because basically he got his enemy fighting amongst themselves. So let's read. Verse 7. And when he had so said, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the multitude was divided. Good on you, Paul. We should be as smart as that. There's a lesson here. You can literally divide your enemies, get them fighting amongst themselves with the power of your words. I experience this on the regular. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, neither angel nor spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. I don't know who these Sadducees were, but it's interesting that they didn't believe, these things. Think about the things they saw with their own eyes during Jesus's life, and yet they don't believe in a spirit. It's interesting. And there arose a great cry, and the scribes that were of the Pharisees' part arose and strove, saying, we find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel hath spoken to him, let us not fight against God. Yeah. That's like the third time this idea of not fighting against God's shown up in the book of Acts. Verse 10. And when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain, okay, this is the Roman chief captain, fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces of them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and to bring him into the castle. Okay, so again, this chief captain, this Roman chief captain, he probably sees all of this as just like a bug biting his skin, and he just wants to flick these idiots off and be done with it all. All they do is whine and cry and create chaos, but he has an obligation to protect Paul because Paul has appealed to Caesar. Okay, so this chief captain, this is a critical task for him to protect Paul. All right, verse 11. And the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, these are the words of the Lord that I'm about to read. Be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. So now Paul has clear direction from the Lord where his life is going. He's seen everything that's happened up to this point, and yet he still has to go on and carry on to Rome. All right. So let's look at what happens next. And when it was day, certain of the Jews banded together. It's always that language, certain of the Jews. If you do a word study on certain in relation to people, certain women, certain men, certain Jews, okay, I would tell you, you don't want to be that kind of certain person. It's always a negative connotation. So just think about that. Okay, so certain Jews banded together and bound themselves under a curse, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. Well, this is why I say, when you ignore or minimize or literally kick Paul out of your life, you will spiritually starve. You're going to be hungry spiritually, you're going to be thirsty spiritually, and it need not be so. Verse 13, and they were more than 40 which made this conspiracy. And they came to the chief priests and elders and said, we have bound ourselves under a great curse that we will eat nothing until we have slain Paul. Wow, such brave guys. Now, therefore, ye with the council signify to the chief captain that he bring him down unto you tomorrow, as though ye would inquire something more perfectly concerning him, and we, or ever he come near, are ready to kill him. So 40 plus men going to the Jewish religious leadership saying, hey, go tell the Roman chief captain that we need to talk to Paul again. And it's all a conspiracy. They're trying to set Paul up. All right. So thankfully, and no surprise, God wasn't, God wasn't, biting his nails, wondering what's going to happen, right? So he allows Paul's sister's son. Okay. So Paul's nephew overhears this. Let's read it. Verse 16. And when Paul's sister's son heard of their lying in wait, he went and entered into the castle and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions unto him and said, bring this young man unto the chief captain, for he hath certain thing to tell him. Verse 18. So he took him and brought him to the chief captain and said, Paul the prisoner called me unto him and prayed me to bring this young man unto thee, who hath something to say unto thee. Verse 19. Then the chief captain took him by the hand and went with him. This is interesting. We don't know how old Paul's nephew is, but this gesture of this, I mean, you imagine this chief captain, you know he had to be like a veteran soldier, probably lots of scars, lots of injuries. This was a rough and tumble man, right? And yet he takes this boy by the hand to lead him so they can have a private conversation. So it's just interesting. Try and visualize that for a second. I mean, this chief captain's probably in some kind of regalia or possibly even body armor. So just imagine that for a minute. But it suggests that this boy is a younger boy, that he felt the need to take him by the hand. And went with him aside privately and asked him, "What is that thou hast to tell me?" And he said, okay, so this is Paul's nephew speaking. "The Jews have agreed to desire thee that thou wouldest bring down Paul tomorrow into the council, as though they would inquire somewhat of him more perfectly. But do not thou yield unto them, for there lie in wait for him of them more than 40 men, which have bound themselves with an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now are they ready, looking for a promise from thee." So the chief captain then let the young man depart. Okay, so again, suggestion of age there, young man, not a boy, probably not a 19 or 20-year-old, because that would have been like military age. So I don't know, probably 14, 12 to 14 years old, maybe. So the chief captain then let the young man depart and charged him, "See thou tell no man that thou hast showed these things to me." Well, yeah, that would have been important, because if the 40 had heard that, their plot had been discovered, they would have maybe changed plans and tried something else. Verse 23, "And he called unto him 2 centurions, saying, Make ready 200 soldiers to go to Caesarea, and horsemen 70, and spearmen 200 at the 3rd hour of the night." Wow. So what do you think? Did the chief captain overreact? You got 40 plus Jews saying they're not going to eat or drink until they kill Paul. And so he gathers 2 centurions, 200, and he tasks 2 centurions to do these things. Get 200 soldiers, horsemen 70. I think that's 30, I think that's 40. I think that's 40 horsemen. So we have 200 soldiers, 40 horsemen, and 200 spearmen. So we have 440 soldiers, 200 on foot, 40 on horse, and 200 spearmen probably on foot as well. So think about that. How serious did this chief captain take his job to protect Paul? 40 Jews of unknown abilities, and this chief captain calls up a small army. Okay. Verse 24, "And provide them beasts that they may set Paul on and bring him safe unto Felix the governor." So something to remember is that if a Roman centurion was tasked with protecting or containing a prisoner, if he failed in his duty, he would be killed. So failure was not an option, not even for this chief captain. And so he was assuring himself of success in protecting Paul and getting him to the governor. And he wrote a letter after this manner: "Claudius Lysias, unto the most excellent governor Felix, sendeth greeting. This man was taken of the Jews and should have been killed of them. Then came I with an army and rescued him, having understood that he was a Roman." Verse 28, "And when I would have known the cause whereof they accused him, I brought him forth into their council," meaning the Jewish council, "whom I perceived to be accused of questions of their law, but to have nothing laid to his charge worthy of death or of bonds. And when it was told me how that the Jews laid wait for the man, I sent straightway to thee, and gave commandment to his accusers also to say before thee what they had against him. Farewell." This chief captain is effectively kicking the hot potato that the Apostle Paul has become, and he's kicking it down the road to Felix and kind of washing his hands of it all. And I'm sure it was with some great relief when he saw his small army go off into the sunset with Paul on the back of a horse. And he probably was like, woo, glad to be done with all that. Then the soldiers, as it was commanded them, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris On the morrow, they left the horsemen to go with him and returned to the castle, who, when they came to Caesarea and delivered the epistle to the governor, presented Paul also before him. And when the governor had read the letter, he asked of what province he was. And when he understood that he was of Cilicia, so this is Felix the governor asking the apostle Paul, what province are you from? So Felix wanted to identify who is this man that's before me and is creating all this ruckus. And so Felix concludes with, I will hear thee, said Felix, when thine accusers are also come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's judgment hall. And this is where the verse or the chapter ends. Okay, hey, if you're still here with me, I applaud you for having a better attention span than 3 seconds. And I hope, most importantly, that you got some understanding about this chapter, that maybe you got some encouragement to read your Bible for yourself. And if you have any questions, hey, drop it in the comments. Let's talk about it. I appreciate you being here. I look forward to seeing you again on the next video. Have a good Bible reading.